The number is 1-800-222-5222, and I welcome calls. And I'm sure that my next guest is going to spark a few. His name is Robert Zimmerman, Jr., and he's George Zimmerman's older brother. Robert, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Robert, why are you speaking out on your brother's behalf?
I'm really more importantly speaking out on the family's behalf, the Zimmerman family, which has kind of evolved into two separate entities. There's George the defendant, and then there's the rest of the Zimmerman family. But we all kind of got homogeneously attacked. We were one group that was on the run for our lives, and we've been backed into corners. We've run like rats from hole to hole trying to stay alive, afraid for our lives, had hand-delivered death threats. We don't want this to happen to another family. We don't want the race card being played, and we don't want a media agenda taking over a dialogue that should be a conversation that should be about fact and evidence. One
of the other things that happened to you, and we're going to get into what happened that night in a second, Robert, is that Spike Lee tweeted where he thought your family resided.
That's right.
And what happened?
Well, that family was actually the McLean family, and they had to leave.
Oops.
Yeah, oops, exactly. Yes, they had to leave their home. That was actually the night I was on CNN's air because the Black Panthers had put a price on George's head, and I thought that really crossed the line. I had been warned myself about my address being compromised by Florida law enforcement, and there comes a point when enough is enough. But yeah, Spike Lee and others tweeted addresses so that I guess whoever was going to come exact revenge knew exactly where to go.
And Al Sharpton famously said if your brother was not arrested and charged, he was going to, quote, take things to another level, close quote, whatever that meant.
That's right. And, you know, who's to say? I can't get into his frame of mind, but, you know, Al Sharpton, others have had their hands in the bucket throwing stones at our family for a really long time, and we're trying to take back some control of how we're portrayed in America and in the world. And we'd like to be Americans, and we'd like what comes from this in the end for all people who hear the name Zimmerman to, if there were fair questions that needed to be asked about elements of a crime or that night, to examine them as fair questions, but to really think about what you did to a family, you know, people collectively did to a family, and that it could happen to anyone.
Okay, let's go back to the night, Robert Zimmerman. Would you concede at the very least, excuse me, that the Sanford police did not investigate what happened that night as thoroughly as they should have?
Well, you know, what I would concede at the very least is that there were some questions initially that I heard from my recollection, such as, you know, why was George not tested for alcohol or drugs? Or to those people asking those questions, to their understanding he was not. There were some questions asked about this stand your ground law. What I would concede is that some of those answers were not immediately forthcoming. And we know that in our society there's a reason for that. You know, you don't want to compromise investigations. And I think that disconnect sort of between the time that the questions were being asked and when they were being answered caused a lot of speculation and a lot of race inflection.
I'm talking to Robert Zimmerman, Jr., the brother of George Zimmerman. So, Robert, what you're telling me is that the police did conduct a thorough investigation. The news of how thorough that investigation did not get out until later.
Exactly.
Was your brother polygraphed?
It's my understanding it's come out in court, at least his attorneys brought forth, and I don't know, I'm not an attorney, whether it's admissible or not in a final stand your ground hearing or courtroom, but it's my understanding that he took voice stress analysis test, which is the new kind of polygraph that listens for signs of deception in the voice. And he took more than one, I believe 3, and they all 3 showed no sign of deception.
And contrary to what was reported at the time, Robert Zimmerman, your brother was in fact handcuffed and was briefly arrested.
He was detained. That's right. Yes.
Now, the defense has been, as you know, that he was saw somebody suspicious and called 911. And the dispatcher instructed him not to get out of the car, and he, quote, defied the dispatcher's instructions, which is the line that a lot of people have been saying. What is your interpretation of what you think happened that night?
Well, I think that what the evidence shows, and just taking from what you said, there is a misconception that there was some kind of an instruction or a suggestion, don't get out of the car. To my knowledge, that never happened. George got out of his car.
The dispatcher said, quote, "We don't need you to do that," which is very different than don't get out of the car.
That's right, right. He got out of his car. He didn't say, "I'm getting out of my car." And this is, again, from my recollection of what I've heard that's been submitted into evidence. He got out of his car. He looked, he followed as best he could Mr. Martin for the reason of getting an address. And when he was following Trayvon, the dispatcher asked him, "Are you following him?" And he said yes. And the dispatcher replied, "Okay, we don't need you to do that." And then George said, "Okay," but a lot of media outlets cut that final "okay" off because that's where the story would end if it were actually reported accurately. When he said "okay," he stopped in his tracks. He turned, he went right back to his car, and he was the one that was encountered by Mr. Martin.
Now, when you tell us the version of events as you understand them, are you doing it based on what you've read? Are you doing it based on what you've read plus what you've learned from your brother having had a conversation with him?
Well, originally, what I refer to always is the Pierce Morgan interview that I did, which I let stand as a body of work, as a final product of what my recollection was. And we tell the truth in our family. I went on the air that night, March 29th, about a month after it happened, to tell the truth. I did speak with George within 24 hours of the incident, and that's on CNN's air. And he recounted to me exactly what had happened, and spoke to him, several times after that, and he would come forth with more details because George was very, very hurt by this. He wasn't happy about this. Nobody in our family was relieved at this, and details were forthcoming kind of slowly. But yeah, that's from my recollection from what George told me.
Now, when did George tell you about the shooting?
I believe it was 24 to 36 hours after, from himself. I learned from my little sister beforehand.
And how did your little sister learn?
My little sister lives in Florida, and she called to tell me that she had something very serious to share, that I had to pay attention to her. And I immediately asked her, I said, "Oh my God, has someone died?" Thinking it was someone in my family. And she said, "Well, someone is dead, but it's not what you think, and someone has attacked George. He was on his way to Target. And he somehow got in some kind of confrontation with this person, or was confronted, and now there's a young person who died."
Then you pick up the phone, you call George?
George called me.
And you guys talked for how long?
45 minutes, somewhere.
And his state of mind was?
Sad, in a word. That's the first word that comes to mind. Sad, profoundly saddened. Not the same George I had left just days ago. Just days ago, I was in Florida. I lived at the time in Virginia. George was taking care of our dad in the hospital, staying overnight with him. And I was at my family's home, running the home and taking care of our grandmother who suffers from dementia. And the George I left was not the George I was speaking to on the phone.
Robert, when you had your 45-minute conversation with him, did you get into detail about what happened that night?
Well, it was about 45 minutes, and George tried to convey what had happened. I had been, warned that this was a sensitive topic for George, obviously, and not to press him on details by another family member, that he was not himself, and that he would be forthcoming in his own time, and he was. At this point, was your brother unaware of whether he would be arrested and charged? At this point, we were all unaware. What our understanding was that this was an investigation, our understanding as a family, of what was to be a justified or justifiable homicide, or a taking of a life in self-defense, because of the fact, when he called me the next day, his ears were bleeding, his nose was broken. He told me all the things that had happened to him, and the way we understood it, he had defended his life.
Did you see him?
I did not. My father saw him, my mother saw him, my sister saw him. I didn't live in Florida.
Did you guys hire a lawyer?
We did not, and George did not invoke his Fifth Amendment rights, told the truth under voice stress analysis, told the truth despite not knowing whether there was contradictory evidence that would come to light in the future, such as a videotape, showing exactly what had happened that would contradict his words. He told the truth, and that's a family value of ours.
Obviously, in retrospect, you realize what a huge mistake that was, not to have consulted counsel right away.
I think that, our mistakes are ours to make, and I would have gone about it a little bit differently. I think that George really believed that people who take the oath,
he thought he had done nothing wrong, and there was no reason to get counsel. I'm sure that's what he thought.
That's pretty accurate.
1-800-222-5222. When we come back, There's been some DNA finding of no DNA on the I'm sorry, was it Trayvon Martin had no signs of DNA on the gun?
I think that's
what
what's
we
come
found
forward. Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a second. And if anybody wants to call Robert Zimmerman about the case, give us a call right now at 1-800-222-5222. You're going to stick around for a while. I'm Larry Elder. With the news, here is Steve Kindred. I'm talking to Robert Zimmerman. He is the older brother of George Zimmerman, the man accused of second-degree murder in the case of the death of Trayvon Martin. Robert, what did you think when you heard President Obama say, if I had had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon?
I think President Obama, he started that statement out really well by saying that the Attorney General reports to him and that he had to be real careful with what he said. But I remember him interjecting himself before with Skip Lewis Gates in Massachusetts and kind of embarrassing himself, ultimately. And I think that a lot of people voted for President Obama because they believed he would be the person, finally, that would bring us beyond race for not just an election, but for our lifetimes, for our children's lifetimes. The White Men's Club, which was the presidents of the United States, would no longer be the White Men's Club. I couldn't understand how he, from the Rose Garden, chose to make race so relevant. I mean, surely he wasn't referring to Trayvon Martin's teeth or his, other physical attributes. I think he clearly made a statement about the color of his skin. It felt like a betrayal. I think it wasn't presidential. It made us feel kind of bullied. I don't know that he would know how many people can hear something like that and what kind of effect it can have to incite their mindset that, even the president, who in effect adopted this boy as his son from the Rose Garden, who George went out and murdered, how it validates their opinion. Or the feelings they have about that opinion. Words, getting thrown around like hate. I hate the Zimmermans. Those racist this or racist that. I think it would have been more presidential to say in our country we investigate things, and the courts have the final say.
I believe I've read, Robert, that your brother was a registered Democrat.
That's come out recently.
Yeah.
That's right. And George was actually a big proponent or promoter of Barack Obama, trying to convince our parents to vote for Obama, me, back when Obama was running, because I think he was one of those people who thought Obama was going to...
Exactly what a racist would do, right? What race are you? What race do you describe as when you fill out a form? What do you put down when they ask for race?
That's a very interesting question. The forms got more and more complicated as the years went on. It was, white, black, other, and we were Hispanic. So we would ask our parents, what are we? Are we white, black? Or they'd say, well, white, because obviously you're not black, and then it would become white, black, Hispanic, but Hispanic not from here, maybe from Puerto Rico, or are you an Eskimo or an American Indian and a Native American? We describe ourselves, we always have, as Hispanic, and we didn't make distinction in our home between this race or that. We did make some kind of distinction as it related to our culture. We had two cultures in our home growing up. Our mom, who's from Peru, and her fluency in Spanish and all her Latin American.
¿Se habla español?
Sí, hablo español.
And your brother?
Por supuesto, hablo español.
So you both are fluent in Spanish?
Of course.
So your brother was first described, as you know, as white.
That's right.
And then white and Jewish. And then white, half Hispanic, I've heard lately,
right.
Which means that President Obama is half white, half black, but no one ever says that.
That's the thing is, our father also had a mixed race son, and he happened to look like George, and he's a fellow American. And why, a mixed race American such as Barack Obama, who's Harvard educated, couldn't rise above that racial interjection of hatred and say something truly presidential to bring us together is a mystery. It made us really feel bullied.
Your brother must have talked to you in that 45-minute conversation about what he thought was a rise in crime in his community. Did he say that, and why in particular did he follow Trayvon Martin?
Well, he didn't talk in that conversation about what was a rise in crime. We knew George was on the neighborhood watch. He was a volunteer, not a self-appointed captain or not a
commander,
not a commander or a gun-toting cowboy or a Rambo on a mission. He was a volunteer. There were a lot of, and by a lot I mean, we have to look at the statistics to speak for themselves, but there were a lot of break-ins in that community, and it was a gated community. And I think that anyone who moves to a gated community thinks that that's going to be some kind of buffer or barrier to that situation, but in effect it wasn't. That gate provided no protection.
And did I not hear that your brother, in fact, was instrumental in capturing at least one person and solving some crime of theft that took place in this community?
I think that he called while there was a crime in progress. That's right.
And Robert, the slam against your brother is that he's been a wannabe cop. He's a Barney Fife. He's a guy that couldn't shoot straight, but he always wanted to be a cop at a big city or a big department like the FBI, and his mindset was simply one of the kind of mindset that a vigilante would have. Your reaction to that is?
Well, I think that George, he may have a little bit of a Caesar complex. He's very honest himself. He's very forthright himself. That's why he didn't hire an attorney. That's why he didn't invoke his rights. That's why he went and he told people he thought were honest, like cops, the truth. George always told the truth from the beginning, and any of those other descriptions had to do with furthering a narrative because there were not answers forthcoming. They really had nothing to do with George.
Had George been in trouble with the law before?
He had a run-in 2005 as a young person, didn't make the wisest decision at the time. He got in some kind of altercation or scuffle with a police officer who was not identified as a police officer, and later those charges were dismissed.
I've read that George has black friends, black buddies. Can you talk about that?
We all have black friends. We all have black buddies,
I don't have any black friends.
Oh, okay.
Speak for yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, George and I and our family, growing up, we had a lot of white people around us, and the exception to the rule were black people. Before there was an influx of Latin Americans and immigrants who were people who also spoke Spanish like us. So we found a lot of kinship with the traditions and ways of the African American community growing up in our home, because we knew we were a minority. And so we didn't have to look further than our own mother, than our own home, to understand or to have some kind of empathy with how black people felt growing up, and understood it wasn't otherness. It actually, for us, was more sameness with them.
Before we go to the break, and we're going to invite people to call Robert Zimmerman, George Zimmerman's older brother, at 1-800-222-5222. Robert, the significance in your mind of not finding Trayvon Martin's DNA on the gun?
I'm not an attorney, and I'm not George's attorney, and I think that George's attorney should have the final say on what that is. For me personally, I've never read in anything that's been admitted to court, I've never heard George say, nor did he say to me, in my recollection ever, that Mr. Martin's hands were on the gun. I believe that he attempted to disarm him or moved to disarm him, slid his hand on his body, in combination with saying, "You're going to die tonight." Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's going to be significant. I'm sure it's significant to some people. And Robert, I've heard different things about who it was that witnesses heard screaming that night. I've heard that it was your brother. I've heard that it was Trayvon Martin. Who was screaming? Unequivocally, it was my brother screaming, and I know different people have heard from different sources, but our father, right away, before this blew up into the mess that it's become, went to the prosecutor's office and swore out an affidavit, swore a statement, swearing under penalty of perjury that was his son on that recording. And I know it's his voice because he sounds like me. 1-800-222-5222. My guest is Robert Zimmerman, Jr. He is the older brother of George Zimmerman. We're taking your calls. 1-800-222-5222. My guest is Robert Zimmerman, Jr. He is the older brother of George Zimmerman, who, of course, is being accused of murdering Trayvon Martin. In fact, he's been charged with second-degree murder. When he got charged, I'm sure you were shocked. Absolutely, yeah. April 11th, I'll never forget the day. What did you think was going to happen? I thought it was going to take a lot of courage, and this is just my opinion. If a prosecutor was going to not charge him, that would have to be a really, truly courageous person to do what we opine as a family would be the right thing to do, an objective examination of fact, and maybe perhaps bothering to subpoena his medical records, seeing that as relevant, and that didn't happen. Instead there was a prayer meeting with the, quote, sweet, sweet parents, and that's how the prosecutor in this case decided to go about fact-finding, was to start off with some kind of prayer. Brian is in Redondo Beach. Brian, you're on with the brother of George Zimmerman. His name is Robert Zimmerman. And Larry, go ahead, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Larry. Robert, I just want to let you know I recently went through the training for the Florida concealed permit, And I really don't see anything that your brother did that was wrong, other than putting himself in a position where he may have to use his gun.
Okay.
But he did get in a position where he had to use it, and I have a feeling that he's going to be acquitted. And Larry, I was just wondering if you thought that that would result in, widespread civil unrest.
You said widespread? No. Will there be the occasional knucklehead who's going to set fire to a car or do something like that? Yes. But I don't think they'll be widespread. I'll tell you why, Brian. As far as I'm concerned, I'm just giving you my opinion, Robert. Your brother never should have been charged. As far as I'm concerned, the investigation that night or shortly thereafter was sufficiently thorough. As a former law clerk with the DA's office here in L.A., I can tell you right now, if your brother had not become famous and the data, the evidence that had been gathered had been brought to a DA by a detective, I've seen these things. They sit there and they say, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. And the DA's job is to say, well, what about the knuckles on the alleged victim's hand? What about the fact that the guy you want to bring charges against has cuts on his back of his head? What about this? What about this? I can't get a jury of 12 to convict him. This is not good enough. Give me something else. That's what would have happened. Never should have been charged. And so, Brian, this is not some slam dunk O.J. Simpson case where George Zimmerman walks after butchering two people the way O.J. Simpson did. This is somebody who's going to be found not guilty and should never have been tried in the first place.
I completely agree with you, because I've actually watched the show that actually shows George walking with the police to step by step, showing what happened, and it's completely different than what the media or the larger media is reporting, which leads me to believe that you have a lot of people around the country that think this was a racial thing, and when he gets off, it's going to be similar to a Rodney King getting off, or not Rodney King, but when the police officers were acquitted.
And Brian and Robert was very adamant, Brian, that George did not follow Trayvon Martin. But let's assume that he did follow Trayvon Martin. Where's the law that says you can't follow somebody in your own neighborhood? Where's that law? Well,
when you do the CCW training, there's actually a part that you have to read that says, if you're going into a situation where you're going to have a confrontation, you should avoid that.
Of course you should avoid it, but if you're the neighborhood watch guy and your job is to make sure that crime is monitored in your neighborhood, that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Don't you want people in your neighborhood to be proactive?
I would totally agree, and I just think that that's what the prosecution is going to try and use, and I don't think it's going to work.
I don't think so either. And he's got a permit to have a CCW? Come on. Robert's going to stick around, take a few more calls. 1-800-222-5222. My guest is Robert Zimmerman, Jr., the older brother of George Zimmerman. Don't go away. Buenas tardes, Los Angeles. I'm going to dispense with the normal opening of the show because of the gravity of our topic right now. I'm talking with Robert Zimmerman, Jr. He is the brother of George Zimmerman. He's the older brother of George Zimmerman. And we're discussing the... What do you call it? The Trayvon Martin case? Do you call it the George Zimmerman case? What do you call it in your mind, Robert?
I call it the case that involves my brother. And there's we're his family. I think that's how we're always going to see it. And I know that I might get flack for that. And I know that you, being a man of color, you went out bravely when this was all initially being reported and making national news, and spoke out and said, "Hey, let's wait for the facts. There might be something civil here." There weren't many facts forthcoming then, but I know you too got some flack about it. And I had family in the area recommend this broadcast, and I want to thank you and warn you that there will be some people, as I'm sure you know, that are not too happy that you have me on your air. But nonetheless, I do appreciate the opportunity today to respond to some of those.
Well, I was called a lot of names, but I've been called worse by better. So it's just part of the territory. I would think for you and for your family, one of the turning points in this case has got to have been when President Obama publicly said, "If I had had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon."
That's right.
Tell me about the impact of that on you and on your family, on your brother.
Well, it was almost an escalation. It was, first the Attorney General was speaking about it, or the spokesperson at DOJ, and then things got serious. We had to cut ties with people. Things started escalating. Then you had the press secretary at the White House responding to the same thing, and we thought, perhaps this might eventually escalate to the president because the buck stops there, and then he'll remind everyone that we're a country of laws. We're based on the the concept that people who are accused of any crime are innocent until proven guilty, and that we have investigations to determine guilt, that we're not tried by media or by public opinion. But he took the low road and brought up race. And it was like, it felt to me like someone was kicking me in the stomach. That was the president of our country, who was a turning point in our history, the first African American president, again invoking the color of his race in a theoretical person who doesn't even exist.
It's unclear to me where your brother lives, where your father lives, where your mother lives, where you live.
We have a family home.
Which is where?
Which is in Florida. I think everybody knows that. I think that's part of the record, as it were.
It's the address that Spike Lee wishes he had when he tweeted where you thought your parents lived.
Well, that's the family home. That's George is ordered to remain in Seminole County. He's not at that home. He's in hiding. He can't leave that county as it is now, as the order permits.
And the rest of you. When this happened, did you have to move? Were you guys getting phone calls and things like that?
The rest of us moved several times. We had months where our life was based out of suitcases, U-Hauls, and storage units and hotels. And that's basically how we lived. Some hotels would be compromised because media would descend on that hotel and everybody would have to move again. And I was in Virginia. I moved to Washington, D.C. right around the time that this happened, days before or days after, literally. And I thought, I'll be able to blend in here. There's a city of millions of people. No one will ever care. But I was wrong, and I was threatened in a coffee shop and in a mall. And my family wanted us all to be united, and I wanted to be with them because my dad had just been in the hospital, and so had my grandma. And George and I had both come together as brothers to take care of our parents when they needed us, and I knew this was one of those same situations.
When this was first reported, your brother was described as white and Jewish.
Right.
And your race and religion are what?
Our race is Hispanic. We're mixed race, and our religion, our father was Baptist, raised Baptist. Our mother is Catholic, raised Catholic, and we grew up in a Christian home. We went to Catholic school, all of us, at some point in our education or another, and followed Catholic traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And my father as well, going to church for major holidays and things like that with the rest of the family.
¿Y se habla español?
Sí, hablamos español en la casa, siempre lo hemos hablado.
Mm-hmm. The night in question, let's go back to there, Robert. When the police were investigating this, is it a deal where the cops knew your brother and therefore were far less inclined to be suspicious about him because they knew him, they knew that he was involved in Neighborhood Watch?
I don't know. That's something I guess that will come out moving forward in a hearing or a trial. I don't know what officer knew of anybody. I know that George had criticized the police, the Sanford police, openly, describing them as lazy before, and then had kind of had his concerns addressed. He was on a ride along. He didn't like what he saw, and he had his concerns addressed by the chief. And after that, had when someone in the Sanford police's son was involved in beating a homeless man who happened to be black, Sherman Ware, George, who's a Hispanic, went out to black churches all over Sanford and waited for the congregation to wrap up their service and come out to the parking lot where he handed out flyers and told people, this man's not receiving justice because he's homeless and or black. And I think that you should know that because he's one of our brothers and sisters.
And that resulted in the chief being fired, right? As I recall.
I'm not sure if it resulted in the chief being fired or the person's father. What I know happened is that guy eventually, charges were filed against him and he was found guilty, I believe.
Right, and in part because of your brother's efforts. He was finally charged.
That's right.
And this was the son of the police chief or something like that, somebody who's kind of protected.
It was a higher up in the Sanford police.
Now, your brother was accused of uttering a slur when he was, quote, following or having his suspicion that Trayvon Martin was doing something bad in the neighborhood. Tell us what your understanding is of that alleged slur.
I think it's very telling when you say your brother was accused of saying a slur. On George's interview on Sean Hannity, he said when he heard the tape, it was very clear. On the tapes that I've heard, it's very clear what he's saying. The word is punks. I was asked about that word on the air. It wasn't a major deal that George recounted because he didn't use a racial slur, so he wouldn't have recounted, this is what happened, and here's where I said a racial slur, and then there's what happened. Now, I think it's very telling who reported that and what their motivations would be to further a story, whether it's to sell more newspapers, get more magazine circulation, get sensation on the air of saying, hey, I think we hear coons, because you don't have to prove what you think you hear. You can opine anything. And then once you broadcast that on the air irresponsibly, it can result in tragedy for a family.
My guest is Robert Zimmerman, Jr. He is the older brother of George Zimmerman. Now, Robert, we've all seen instances where somebody has committed a crime and the evidence is overwhelming. Let's just take the O.J. Simpson case. And then you see O.J. Simpson's daughter standing by him and a bunch of friends publicly saying he didn't do it. And so whenever I hear a relative, a mother, a father, a brother say that my brother did not do X, Y, Z, I always understand that you're not going to be the most objective person when you're evaluating what happened. So why should people believe you?
Well, I think that what I'm really saying is that my brother told the truth, and it's unacceptable. I'm not saying he did or didn't do anything. I'm saying what he told was the truth, and his truth was questioned because of the word white, and I think that's a travesty for our country. I think to use any word, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, to describe someone's race and therefore question their integrity is unacceptable going forward from this. And I think that what my role is for our family is to reintroduce the family. But as it relates to George, to just say, please stop prejudging everything and trying everything in the media or in the court of public opinion. There is a real court where fact does come out in our country.
Robert, if your brother's last name were Martinez, would you and I be having this discussion?
It's hard to say, but I doubt it.
Steve, can you play President Obama, please?
If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
That was quite a statement.
Quite a statement.
And you said your brother is a registered Democrat, voted for Obama, and tried to convince you to vote for him as well.
To my understanding, he voted for Obama because he was trying to convince everyone in the family to vote for Obama, because this was the man that was going to get us past race. This was the right man for the job, not because of his race. We would be a race-free, colorblind society from this point forward. And then there he goes making statements
Have
like
you had
that.
any contact, any outreach with the Trayvon Martin family? Have they had any contact, outreach to you?
I know that my brother is barred from having any kind of contact except through his attorneys in matters regarding discovery with any part of Trayvon's family, any member of Trayvon's family. We did on KTTV, I read a statement that my family all had a hand in crafting, everyone but George, because their family had not heard from myself, my father, my mother, and my sister what our feelings were at the time, what actually transpired. Other things were reported, that we were insensitive, that we didn't care, that we were liars, we were racist, our daddy judge was making up excuses, and that he's a racist. And what actually happened was a young man died, and we were all profoundly saddened by that. And in that context, that would be contact that I had with them indirectly. I did see them at the bail hearing. I looked into every one of their eyes. And this is a story about human beings, and I think that we need to keep that in mind.
1-800-222-5222. My guest is Robert Zimmerman, Jr., George Zimmerman's older brother, and we're taking your calls at 1-800-222-5222. We'll be right back. The number is 1-800-222-5222. My guest is Robert Zimmerman, Jr., George Zimmerman's older brother, and he's speaking out on his brother's behalf. When you began speaking out on your brother's behalf, did you do so with George's blessing? Did George say, don't do it? Did George say, be careful? What was the attitude of George when you told him you were going to speak out on his behalf?
Well, when I first said anything to defend him, he was in deep, deep hiding, and we could not communicate. And in fact, that was the case for a lot of our family members. Right before I went on the air on Piers Morgan, I had a conversation with my mom. So I had my family's blessing, and it was important that going forward, now, that George is not involved in what we're doing as a family, because he's kind of a separate legal entity as being a defendant, but that my entire family has a say in what I do representing them.
Mm-hmm. Before we go to the phones, Robert, just a quick summary of the evidence that I think suggests that your brother did not do anything wrong, let alone second-degree murder. And they include in no particular order that he was lawfully in possession with a permit to carry a concealed weapon, that he was lawfully looking around to make sure that crime was monitored in his neighborhood. It's called caring about your neighborhood, being proactive. I understand that there are bruises on Trayvon Martin's hands, on his knuckles, indicating that your brother was telling the truth when he said the two were scuffling. I understand there are bruises in the back of your brother's head, indicating that your brother was telling the truth when he said that Trayvon Martin got the jump on him, was banging his head on the concrete. This was a story that your brother told the cops. He was fairly consistent with that. And there was at least one witness who heard a scream, and the scream appeared to be a scream that came from your brother. I understand that the father of Trayvon Martin initially said that it wasn't Trayvon who screamed, but later on he changed and did a 180 on that.
That's right.
So those are, I think, salient pieces of evidence, which to me, if I were a DA and somebody had brought that to me and said, let's go after George Zimmerman for second-degree murder, I would have said, are you smoking something? My job as a DA is to do justice, and I cannot bring charges against somebody unless I think there's a reasonable chance they're going to be convicted. And if you bring all this stuff to me, I don't see any reasonable chance for a conviction, so I'm not going to charge him. That's what I think a responsible DA would have done. However, that said, politics always enters into things.
That's right.
And for example, when the cops who beat up Rodney King were mostly acquitted, there were charges brought under the federal laws arguing that the civil rights of Rodney King were violated. If it weren't for the political pressure to do that, the government would not have done that. I think that was the appropriate thing to do. So I'm not saying that politics ought not ever enter.
Right.
But in this case, it's the NAACP, it's Congressional Black Caucus, it's Al Sharpton's President of the United States weighing in on all of this. And as you said earlier, imagine the cashews that Angela Corey would have had to say, I'm still not going to indict this man.
Right. Right. It would have taken, I think, any prosecutor a tremendous amount of courage. They would have had to be really courageous.
Gloria is in Yorba Linda. Gloria, you're on with Robert Zimmerman Jr. and Larry.
Hi, Larry. Hi, Robert. I just wanted to say that I think your brother is going to get exonerated. And if this would have been where your brother was Trayvon Martin had not been black, I think nothing like this would have ever gone on. So, the best to you and your family. Thank you, there.
Well, Gloria, thank you for the call. I had asked you what do you think would have happened if your brother's last name had been Martinez. I didn't ask you what would have happened if Trayvon Martin had been white or Hispanic. What do you think?
Well, I know that I know, being George's brother, I don't think he would have made any distinction about anybody's race. He never has. They made much ado about that word coon, which he never said and would never say. I don't think anybody's used that word in 40 years. But George does not make distinctions in race as to whether something is worth doing or not worth doing. That's why he mentored black children. Their father, those children, is serving a life sentence in prison, and he knew that they needed some kind of role model, positive role model in their life, to not be let down by society generally. And sometimes that's just a volunteer who just cares and reaches out for themselves, regardless of children's race. I
appreciate your answer, but I guess I was asking, and I apologize for phrasing it so badly. Mm-hmm. What I meant was, do you think there would be the same kind of outcry if Trayvon Martin had been white? Same fact pattern, same thing, but instead of Trayvon Martin being black, he's white.
It's hard to tell. I don't think that the white community has Al Sharptons or Jesse Jacksons or Congressional Black Caucuses. They're just. I think they're an entity that had an agenda. Those entities, financial and other, and the time will come that agenda is revealed as time goes on. But it's hard to say. But I doubt it. That's just my own opinion.
Val is a retired police officer. Val, you are on with Robert Zimmerman and Larry.
Thanks a lot, Larry. First of all, Robert, I personally speaking, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming out and talking about this issue, because I think it is important that we understand the dynamics that are at play here. As far as with Larry, you could have picked a better person to stand up to controversy. So,
thank you.
I'm very glad to have you on. Let me address the issue about the hoodie, since everyone's made such a big deal about that. One thing I will mention in my experience, both as a law enforcement officer and then as a private citizen, a lot of young people today, by the way, regardless of their race, creed, or color, a lot of them wear a hoodie in impolite areas, as I call it, that is a restaurant, a store, a bar even, to be mysterious, to be perceived as mysterious, to be perceived as threatening or intimidating. There's no other reason for them to do it. When hoodies first came around when I was a boy playing in sports, it was designed to help keep you warm. The interest is that while you're sitting on the bench for a while, in between plays or in between sets, you have the hoodie on to keep your temperature down and basically keep your outside temperature under control. Today, it's become some kind of a statement. I think the only reason somebody wears one is for the reasons I've just stated before. I've had this experience with young people a number of times. When I first went law enforcement, when I first left law enforcement, became for a friend temporarily a doorman at a bar. And one of the things that was interesting that I experienced was a young man came up to me in a very demeaning and arrogant manner. His driver's license said he wouldn't be 21 for another 8 months. And when I pointed that out to him, the scornful way he spoke to me, he was wearing a hoodie, by the way, the scornful way he spoke to me actually just amazed me. He had the nerve to say to me, look, man, I already told you I'm going to be 21 in 8 months. In other words, I was the idiot. You cannot reason with people who have that kind of philosophy in life.
Well, so what are you saying, Val? I mean, how do we know that Trayvon Martin had that kind of attitude? All you're telling me is that you once had an encounter with somebody wearing a hoodie, and therefore you've got an attitude about people who wear hoodies.
I would say I do, actually, because my experience has been that there's a lot of arrogance, an awful lot of attitude coming from people in certain age groups. I'm glad you asked me that because I know I wasn't specific. What I'm saying is, you walk into a bar and you're wearing a hoodie. This is a social environment. Why are you wearing the hoodie? There's no reason to be wearing the hoodie. How can anybody talk to you? I actually even confronted one young man who was already legally inside the bar, and asked him, just why are you wearing the hoodie? Oh, I just like to, man. It's cool. Well, I can't see your face. What do you need to see my face for? Because when I'm talking to you, I just want to see your expressions. It's a very, very normal event. The hoodie, to me, suggests that you are trying, as I said, to be intimidating and or mysterious.
Assume, Val, for a moment that it was the hoodie that caused George Zimmerman to be suspicious about Trayvon Martin. And because of the hoodie, he goes, it's been my experience that when I've seen people wear hoodies, they're up to no good. And that's what prompted it. Now, what's your analysis after that?
Well, I will draw a very fine line about that. I am not saying because you're wearing a hoodie, that's what you're intending. I'm saying what you're projecting and what it suggests to me. Oftentimes, it's just a persona thing. You're trying to project that you're something that you're not.
You're coming very close, Val, to saying wearing a hoodie gives you probable cause to question somebody.
Well, it couldn't have, because on a number of occasions I've come across kids walking in the street who I did think were suspicious. The hoodie didn't help, but I did not use the hoodie as I'm saying I don't have to say this now. I'm retired. I don't do this job anymore. But if I saw guys wearing hoodies, that wasn't necessarily the thing that would draw my attention. It was their demeanor and where they were at and the hour they were there and likely their age.
Oh, okay, Val, thank you for the call. Robert, real quickly, did your brother say anything at all about how Trayvon Martin was dressed and whether or not him wearing a hoodie prompted any kind of special attention?
He didn't give me any additional insight. I think that the non-emergency calls speak for themselves. From my recollection, the first thing that he said was that there was someone he did not recognize, and I think that speaks to how well he knew his neighbors. Now that we know in the end that Mr. Martin did not actually live in that community, and had he been someone that George recognized, perhaps regardless of what they were wearing, one hoodie or two hoodies, they might not have been suspicious.
Now, Robert, we talked about the comment that President Obama made. We talked about the comment that Eric Holder made. We've not talked about how NBC edited the 911 tape to make it seem as if your brother was volunteering the race of Trayvon Martin as opposed to having been asked what his race was.
That's right. They sure did.
And your family's reaction to that was what?
NBC was, I think that's who got caught.
Yeah, with NBC. Did they ever apologize to you? Anybody?
No, not to my knowledge, no. They got caught. They were the ones that a lot of people have been editing a lot of things, very selectively to further their line, agenda, story, whatever you want to call it. But I think that NBC did the right thing by firing that person. Like I said before, anybody who makes mistakes like that in a premeditated fashion obviously has an agenda. It's not just an honest mistake of on-air editing. And the unfortunate thing is that when people hear the news, and this just speaks to what, the degradation of what the word news means nowadays, it's really just entertainment. When people hear the news and take it as fact, and hear that as a representation of my brother's words or anybody's words, they don't have to live with the consequences of what they've done. It's a family who has to live with those consequences.
The number is 1-800-222-5222. And speaking of brothers, my brother will be along the following segment after this one, and he's trying to raise some money for MS research. We'll talk to Kirk about that. But for now, Robert Zimmerman Jr. is going to stick around for another 10 minutes or so. We're going to be taking calls right now at 1-800-222-5222. But first with the news, here is Steve.
Come back tomorrow for McIntyre in the Morning. Now back to the stage on Talk Radio 790 KABC.
My guest is Robert Zimmerman Jr., the older brother of George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman, of course, has been charged with second-degree murder in the case of Trayvon Martin. Ray is in Santa Clarita. Ray, how you doing?
Hey, thank you for taking my call, Larry.
Sure.
I have a couple statements. I'll make them brief. First statement is, it's never okay to indict the family for something another family member does. But it's another for the family to indict itself in ill-advised PR campaigns. And second...
Why do you think this is ill-advised, Ray?
Well, just the whole tone of, our guy's innocent, the other guy is guilty automatically. Trayvon had committed no crimes that evening. He was guilty of nothing. He was an innocent person. And because of that, and because of the actions of George Zimmerman, that boy's life was taken. Whether intentionally, unintentionally, that's for a jury to decide. But as to the case, my point was going to be simple. You said something yourself, Larry, that you believe in a fair investigation in the case. Mm-hmm. And in this case, the original homicide detective who investigated the case actually swore out a murder complaint against George Zimmerman. In fact, his words were simple, saying that he did not believe George Zimmerman's account of what happened. It was the DA who rejected that sworn complaint. So a proper investigation was done initially. And lastly...
Well, and Ray, that's right. That's exactly what Robert said. Robert said there was a proper and thorough investigation, but people didn't realize how thorough it was.
Yeah, but Robert
and Ray, it's not uncommon. I told you before, I was a law clerk for the DA's office. It's not uncommon for a detective to feel that charges should be brought, and for the DA to say, no, I don't think I'm going to get a conviction. That happens all the time. Yeah, there's nothing nefarious about that.
Well, no, there's nothing nefarious about it, but the simple fact remains that the original homicide detective who handled the case simply swore out a complaint charging him with second-degree murder in this case, based on George Zimmerman's own words, which, according to Robert Zimmerman, was the truth. And that's my point. If George Zimmerman's initial reporting of this incident was the truth, and the original homicide detective took that truth and charged him with a crime, then there has to be something more to the case than what I'm hearing today on your show.
Well, what about that, Robert? He's right about the detective swearing out a complaint initially. I know I've read that.
Right. I'm vaguely familiar with that. I'm not sure that he said second-degree murder. And again, that's really something for George's lawyer to respond to. I'm not sure that he said second-degree murder, but I think what's come out about that detective, if he's speaking about Chris Serena, was this was the guy who has not yet explained he's been reassigned to Foot Patrol because what he did was take an unauthorized video on his iPhone of George walking in the station and then transferred that video to a network, I believe it was ABC News, that showed George having, apparently no injuries, which we know is completely false. Now, I don't know why a detective would do. I think there is something nefarious about that. Why they would do something in order to record what would be evidence, but have the upper hand on when it got leaked. I think that's strange. I think it's telling he was reassigned. I don't have any internal knowledge of Sanford police or anything like that. So
let's try one more. Ernest is in Inglewood. Ernest, you're on with Robert Zimmerman Jr. and Larry.
Yeah, how you doing? Okay, number one, nobody should. If a person approaches you without a uniform and without a thought at night, you're not supposed to sit up and do what he says do one with you. Okay.
Wait, Ernest, are you telling me that every neighborhood watch person should be wearing a uniform?
When they walk up to me, should I presume that they are who they are? That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to be funny. Should I presume? So everybody, I'm just asking, Ernest. So everybody who's involved in neighborhood watch or neighborhood. No, I said, should you at that time say, okay, I believe who you are, and then I didn't. Evidently that didn't happen. But the other point of what I want to make it is, okay, Is there a video of the situation? Is there a video of it?
No.
There's no video of what happened. Now, okay, when he turned around and walked back to the car, what is the point if the person who's been questioned feels that his life is threatened? Shouldn't he then defend himself as though that the two men are supposed to defend themselves?
Okay. I understand your point, Ernest. What Ernest is saying, Robert, get you a chance to respond to it, is was it not reasonable for Trayvon Martin to be in fear of his life?
You know, I was always taught the best defense is run. If that's really, the case, will not get into the frame of mind of Trayvon Martin or even George. But if what he's alleging, were a plausible scenario, and I said this on March 29th, somehow Trayvon Martin was so close to home yet couldn't find the front door. Somehow he was afraid but couldn't find his way home. He found his way instead to land his knuckles on my brother's nose.
I know you've given a statement, and I want to give you one more chance to say anything to the community, not so much necessarily to Trayvon Martin's family. If you say you're sorry, and you already have, I don't know that that's going to do a whole lot of good given the pain that they're in. But I would like you to kind of address society, the people that believe that your brother was not charged because he was white, the people who believe that black people are routinely hunted down, terms that were used by people like Jesse Jackson. What message do you want to give to society?
I think it'd be remiss if I didn't thank, first of all, the people who opened their homes to shelter us, their hearts to pray for us, their airwaves to host us, such as yourself, and their prayers have sustained us, first and foremost. I think that a good message to take from all of this is that we should be a society that's based on dialogue and examination of fact. And I even remember President Obama, his sort of catchphrase was, "We can disagree without being disagreeable." And I cannot describe what has been happening as anything more than, disagreeable at best. It's borders on violence at worst. I think that when we do have fair questions and when we do have a dialogue about race, about crime, about inequality generally, there are real questions to ask, and we do have to have a soul searching. But I think that when we jump to conclusion based on those questions, because they just involve race, and therefore one thing went down this way or that, we're really doing a disservice to ourselves and the future generations of Americans who are going to look back on this without any solace in the outcome.
George Zimmerman's older brother, Robert Zimmerman Jr. Robert, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
We come back, a quick chat with my brother who's trying to raise money for a bike ride on October the 6th to raise money for MS research. All that's coming up. I'm Larry Elder.